Perceptive individuals make provocative teachers. Teachers who walk between night and day understand magic, mystery, miracle, and spiritual healing.
My work is all based around the heart, and the heart is really the center. We tend to put everything into the brain and logic and reason, and communicating with nature doesn't fit there. It's beyond anything that we can even imagine.
Today, we're privileged to be joined by a truly extraordinary guest, someone who has not only navigated the turbulent waters of grief, but has also carved a unique path in their life. Their transformation journey is a testament to the profound strength and resilience that resides in each of us, inspiring us to embrace loss and shape our future with intention and grace. I'm John Moyer, your host, and you're listening to the Urban Grief Shamans. Please sign up for our newsletter and let me know your thoughts on this episode.
My grandparents were just amazing, and I was blessed to spend lots of time with them. They taught me from an early age that the best medicine comes from your backyard. Plants are just incredible, conscious beings, though they never used that word. Treated them like they were conscious beings.
That's Jen Frey, a healer, mentor, and advocate for the earth with a unique voice in plant communication. As the founder of Heart Spring Sanctuary, they enrich people's lives by deepening their bond with nature through plant communication. Jen has a new book out titled Communicating with Plants. Check out our show notes for a link to Jen's book and discover the unique insights Jen offers.
I always feel like I won the lottery when it comes to grandparents, because my grandparents were just amazing, loving, wonderful people to be with, and I was blessed to spend lots of time with them. And my last grandmother just died a few months ago.
Oh.
I also just turned 48, so to have grandparents in your life that long is such a gift. But so yes, I don't have a memory of plants not being important in my life. My mom is incredible at keeping houseplants alive. Don't ask her to garden. She doesn't like to garden, but houseplants, yes. So I always send my houseplants to her when they need a little bit more attention. My maternal grandfather, he was 100% into organic gardening, so it was very much in his awareness. And so he taught me that you have to sing to the plants. His greenhouse always had music playing for them. We asked permission before harvesting. He never quite said about communicating with the plants. Later in life, my grandfather had dementia, and so while he was still with it, he made sure to give me all of his gardening books. And one of them was The Secret Life of Plants by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird, and which is all about the intelligence of plants. Unfortunately, I didn't read that until my grandfather was too far gone, because by the time I read it, I was like, oh, I think he did communicate, but he just didn't have anyone to talk to about it. So that was a great sadness in my life. But yes, my grandparents were pivotal in my experience connecting with plants and understanding that plants are just incredible, conscious beings, though they never used that word. Treated them like they were conscious beings.
Did you have any idea of the path that they were leading you on? Like at the time?
Oh my gosh, no. That would be wonderful. And I think sometimes people don't, sometimes when people hear my story or other teachers' stories, you forget that there's all these curves and ups and downs. We don't really know. Having said that, from my earliest memory is wanting to be a healer. And I didn't really understand what that was until fourth grade. And in the strangest way, we got these weekly readers, and there was one about a shaman. And when they were describing what they did, I was like, oh, this is the healing that I have been wanting to do. But in that article, it said you had to be male and indigenous. So obviously I'm not that. So I scratched that off the list. But then I tried all these different ways of okay, well, how can I meet this dream? And so I started with herbs. By between 5th and 6th grade, time really saved me from having to take antibiotics. So that was my introduction to herbs, and I dove in more. And then junior high, I started with flower essences and homeopathy. So I started all these roundabout ways. And one of my newer revelations that I hadn't thought about in a long time was I had wanted to be a cardiologist when I was like late junior high. And it's because I really thought the heart was just so important. And I wanted to help people have healthy hearts. And in high school, I shadowed a cardiologist who was a woman. And she told me, look, if you want to have family, if you want to have kids, this is not the right profession to be in. So I scratched that too. But now coming full circle, when I had this realization, I was like, oh my gosh, the heart is the center of all of the work that I do. So here I am. And my program, I have an apprenticeship I called Heart Transformation because it's all about the heart. So it's the same thing. So the path was always been there, but no, I did not know where I was going. My grandparents definitely didn't know where I was going, and they would be shocked, actually.
When did the idea of ki and kin come into this? Did this come from your grandfather?
No, this came from Robin Wall Kimmerer. So I'm not sure if that came out of braiding
Was that
sweetgrass.
braiding sweetgrass? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at dates. I'm not sure what was first. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and she talked about it there, but she also wrote an article for Yes Magazine called Nature Needs a New Pronoun. And so wherever I heard it first, that's what started it. But it is that nature needs a new pronoun. I give that to all of my students in all of my classes and encourage the use of he is the singular non-gendered pronoun for animated pronouns. So rather than using it, and then twin is plural. So yeah, it comes from Robin.
It's a wonderful way to relate to the plant life. It really personalizes them, doesn't it? It makes you feel that it's not an object, but it's somebody who's just visiting for the summer.
Right. Well, for me, I've had this opportunity of working with this for so long, these pronouns. And so now when I read people who are in this work, working with plant spirits or herbs or whatever, and I'm reading their stuff and they use it's like, it jostles me. It hits me in the heart and I'm like, have to read. And so I realized that using these pronouns, we don't think about how important language is, but it's so important. And so using those pronouns have really shifted my brain, even though long before that, I thought plants were alive and I would always ask their permission and have conversations with them as if they were intelligent beings, because they are. The pronouns themselves changed that relationship as well.
It brings respect into the light when dealing with the plants in many ways. That's what I found using it. It just was a higher level of other than just being tender with them, but referring to them in this way. What was life like just before you met Pam for you? How far along your path were you, and how big of an influence, if any, was Pam Montgomery?
So life was, well, there's a few things to answer here. Life was chaotic and awful. My life was chaotic and awful, but I was.
Do you want to think about that?
Yeah, I will. I'll come back to that. I was pretty far along in my path. I already had a healing practice. I had studied with Kate Gilday and David Dalton for flower essence to be a flower essence practitioner. So I started with herbs. I started with a small herb practice, but herbs, I feel like is a foreign language to me. So I just always had to struggle with them, and everybody was on medication and I didn't know how that was interacting in their body, yet alone to throw an herb in there. So when I finally studied with David and Kate and they were together, I studied with them together. It was just like this huge light bulb went off. It's like, oh, this is what I'm meant to be doing. It's like, I understand this. I don't have to work at it. They just blow through me. It makes sense. So I already had my practice. I had been teaching plant communication for many years before I met with Pam. So when I got to meet Pam, when I got to study with her, it was really a deepening in of what I already knew and a confirmation of what I knew. And that's going to go back to this chaotic time. So what was going on in my life is I was really living in two worlds. I was in a very toxic marriage with a narcissist, and I didn't know what a narcissist was at the time. So I had no understanding of what was going on. It wasn't until many years of therapy afterwards that I finally got to say, oh, so that wasn't actually healthy. So I had been mostly a stay-at-home mom. And when my kids, and I homeschooled my kids, but then when they started going to school, I had all this time to just be with the plants, and I would have these incredible experiences that I didn't hear from any other teachers. And I would want to share them with my then husband, and he thought I was lying and making it all up. So he didn't care if that's how I spent my time during the day. But when he was around, I wasn't allowed to discuss it. And we had to go, he was a financial advisor. So we had to go really deep into the superficial aspects of our culture. And so I was just split. So when I did my class with Pam, it just became really obvious that I could no longer, if I was going to continue down this way, I couldn't be in that marriage. And there was another big important catalyst in my life that actually led me to study with Pam. And that's that my brother died suddenly in 2011 at the age of 36. And so I was deep in grief when I went to meet Pam as well. So my world was already shifting, and it was already becoming obvious I couldn't go back to where I was before his death.
Mhm.
So that's where life was not wonderful. My time with the plants was incredible and amazing. And then once I made the decision to leave, that's when we make those decisions that everybody thinks the leaving is the hard part, but it's really the part leading up to the leaving that's the real hard.
Mhm.
Once you make that
It's
choice, everything flows and you get rewarded. Not reward, I don't like that word, but life becomes more wonderful.
mhm.
But you're not losing all that energy that it's taking for you just to try to survive and maintain. Just try to stay as healthy as you can in a really unhealthy situation. So when you get all that energy back, it's like, oh, now I can like really follow my heart and really do what feeds me.
Jen, can you talk a little bit about the basic forms of plant communication, and how do you know, or for the listeners, how would they know that what they're experiencing is real?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, my work is all based around the heart, and the heart is really the center. And that's one of the big things in our culture is that we tend to put everything into the brain and logic and reason, and communicating with nature doesn't necessarily fit there, because it's beyond anything that we can even imagine. So we
Mhm.
have to start by getting into our heart. So that's the basis for anything and everything. And it's still the basis for me. I mean, the plants communicate with me, not necessarily all the time, but sometimes like we were just at a special, we were on vacation at this really special place, and I'm just trying to relax and I'm getting messages for them. So that doesn't happen all the time. But if I want to communicate with the plants, I still have to start by getting into my heart. There's so many ways to do that. The easiest way that I find and the way that I most teach is to work with gratitude. And
Yes.
how we know that we're in our heart space is because there's a physiological shift in our bodies. Our breathing tends to slow. For me, my shoulders will drop, sometimes inches. Our bodies relax. Our heart rate slows. We feel calmer. Sometimes like my hands will feel big or my feet feel weird. Like we might have different body sensations. So
Mhm.
when we're in that space, then we know that we are more able to receive information. So first step, if you want to communicate with the plant, is to look for a plant that wants to communicate with you. Like who's showing up in your life? Because we just think that nobody wants to communicate with us. But once people start to learn this, then they often get overwhelmed because all of the plants want to communicate with them at the same. So
Well,
go ahead.
sorry. Well, I was just going to say that I had always learned that just look around your house, because the ones that you need most will be growing around your house. It might
Oh,
be
absolutely.
weed, no, no weed. I mean, any kind of plant, and
Right.
from mullein to wild cabbage, whatever it might be that you need to relate to, or that medicine. That's a good place to start.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why. So I always taught plant communication in person, and I prefer to teach in person, but I started doing them virtually during COVID just because we had to. And it
Hmm.
became such an incredible experience because people were communicating with the plants that are right there that they've had relationships with. Some they've known they've had the relationships and others they didn't, but it made it so much more personal for them. So I love that. I think it is important to work with the plants that are right there. Often we think we have to go to exotic places or really rare plants, but it's the ones that show up for us every day that have the most impact on our lives.
Mhm. Now, just go over again with that our little Zoom workshop with you, where we had to go outside and do the same, find a plant that wants to communicate with you. And I can't remember, how did you know the name of the plant that I was working with?
Oh, because I knew the plant. But I can't remember if you sent me, I think you sent a picture, but I'm not sure. But I
Oh,
know that.
yeah, I sent you a picture. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. But you somehow, the characteristics of what we're finding out, you also knew about. And I was just surprised by the whole experience of, because there's a number of ones that I was drawn to, but they just didn't feel right. There was, I said, no, thank you. And then as soon as I found this garlic mustard plant that was beside the house down a little dingy laneway, it just spoke volumes. But it was a beautiful experience. Now, I wanted to explore some ideas in your chapter 10, and where I want to direct the conversation is around grief
Yeah.
and the exploration of how plants, plant communication, plant medicine can be a great service for those who are grieving deeply. And just to have that kind of extra support is, they'll find, quite profound. So in chapter 10, you're presenting the black-eyed Susan plant. And what I liked about the title that you picked was Changing Our Story and Why This Relates. It seemed to me that you were talking about people who are having difficulty forming attachments. And then I was reading from me between the lines that they've had experienced some kind of grief or trauma. Would you be able to speak about that?
So, of course, you bring up that chapter. And I say, of course, because as I say very honestly in the book, that's the chapter that I had the hardest time with. I must have rewritten it at least 30 times. And I'm still not completely happy with what came out, but the plants have continued to work with me, and that is growing a lot more. So I said that's the one that I had the hardest time writing, but also I was shocked that the plants wanted Black-eyed Susan in the book, because I thought we were talking mostly about light, and there are other plants that I work with. I only work with Black-eyed Susan in small instances. But since the book has come out and talking with so many people, it's amazing how Black-eyed Susan has continued to come up. So this is a huge subject, and I'll just say that I'm used to hearing people's trauma stories, and I'm actually I read all kinds of books about trauma because I'm fascinated by how we respond to trauma and how our bodies, our brains, all of it are so incredible. Now, we're so adaptable, way more adaptable than what we realize. And so we have all these mechanisms for trying to survive through our trauma. And what the plants say, what all of nature says, if we work with them, is that we're not our trauma, and they want to help us to heal it so that we can remember who we really are. And on top of that, I also just have to say that trauma isn't in of itself a bad thing. Like trauma, or the processing of our trauma, can give us really big gifts. Like everything in life, there's gifts. Not saying that we want to go around traumatizing people. So Black-eyed Susan, one of her gifts is helping us to look at the experiences that we've had in life and see them in a different way. And so that's where the gift comes out. Because once we have an understanding that this situation, okay, so I'm just pausing because my guides are giving me information. So I'm just going to back up a little bit. Because if we all have family members, right? And if we ever share, if you have the privilege of having siblings and you ever talk about a story from your childhood with your siblings, everybody's going to have a different perspective.
Yes.
And it's always like, wait, that's what you expect, right? Like, this is really, let me tell you what really happened. So that's how Black-eyed Susan works, is Black-eyed Susan helps us to see these other perspectives and see like, oh, maybe it's a little bit different than what we thought. And in that process, just by sharing our stories, by looking at a different process or a different perspective, it shifts the energy around the trauma. So it's not really, the problem isn't really the experience we have, but how our bodies respond to it and the energy that's held within, like the story that we attach to it. That's what trips us up again and again. And so if we can shift that, then that helps to release the energy from our bodies and then invites who knows what into our lives.
Mm-hmm. I see grief. I mean, I've been a deep griever, I would say, since childhood. And then there was a really big one that of the mother of my kids had passed away. And it's what I've learned is that with grief, it's a quintessential emotion that really defines the kind of person that we will become. It's like that deep soul, deep heart energy that we need to be taken down, and then just work with that hard energy, or we just bury it and don't do anything with it, which makes our life even smaller,
Right.
with less capacity for compassion and love. And everybody, there's been no one who's ever been on this planet that hasn't gone through grief in some form, right?
Mhm.
As they say, everything that we love, we will lose. And right up to the very last breath that we take is our big loss when we leave this world. And so I just love that idea that this transformation, this powerful transformation that comes to us is through this deep emotion. And there's no other way to get there. I mean, as you wrote in your book, love is healing.
Mhm.
And so that's why grief and love are sisters, that they grief in one hand and love in the other. And the more we can carry, the bigger our embrace becomes, and the greater or the larger life. And so what I loved about Black Eyed Susan was for me, it was hitting on that too, but perhaps more gently than grief. But it's all part of it, isn't it? That's what I was looking for with the wisdom of plants that help us through these big transformations in our life.
Yeah, they're definitely there to help us through. And the part with grief that goes back to what I was saying with my brother, that when he died, and grief never manifests the same way for anybody. And every relationship, when we lose, like if we're only talking about grief in the terms of losing a loved human being or maybe an animal being, 'cause there's so many different forms of grief. But if that's how we look at this, or that's the lens that we're looking at right now, depending on our relationship, we have different levels of grief. So like when my grandmother just died, I did have grief. It shocked me, actually, the depth of grief that I had, because we had been knowing this was going to happen for a long time. And she was 98 or 95. So like it was a time. Whereas my brother was 36 and it was quite sudden. It was such a shock to all of us. But what happened in that moment when my brother died is that my whole world broke apart. And when you lose somebody, again, even if it's somebody that is like going to die, when they're foundational in your life, it has to rock your foundation. And I think this is what you're getting to, is that how it defines a person, because it rocks our foundation, and it is an opportunity, if we choose to take it, and not everybody takes it. If we choose to take it, it is an opportunity to reevaluate our life and what's really important. And let's just be completely honest, in our culture, so much of what we think is important is actually not important. They're not, and it's actually quite harmful for us as human beings to be like alive, awake, aware humans. So grief gives us that brief opportunity of like, who are we? Because we just lost. What I'm getting right now is that we like to think that we are these separate beings, but we're not. We're interconnected. So when this being leaves our life, we lost a part of us.
Yes,
so now,
very much so.
Right. So now we have to readjust. And of course, that takes sometimes years, sometimes like I think the grief is always there. I'm guessing I will always miss my brother and grieve him, but it's definitely not like when he first died, I was on the floor for days, just in a puddle of tears, unable to do anything. And clearly I'm not doing that anymore. And just going back to this connection of grief and love, like the thing that helped me to get through the grief around my brother, was recognizing that if I hadn't experienced the love with him that I had experienced, I wouldn't have experienced the level of grief. So they're intimately connected, and grief is the ultimate expression of love.
Very much so. I agree with that. What did I say with that? Did you want to share a little bit about Michael? and why your love was so intense for him?
My brother Michael, yeah.
Yes.
So my
He
brother,
sounds like quite an individual, the way that you spoke of him in your book.
he was. So first, my brother Michael, we're not biological siblings. Our parents married when I was 5 and he was 6. So we were 18 months apart, but he came into my life when I was 3 and he was 4. So we grew up together. And I don't know, he quite an individual. He was the center of my world. He was the center of my universe. Funny as could be. He would roll on the floor with laughter, and you could be so angry with him. And yet you would just have to laugh. So my brother tended to get away with a lot because everybody just laughed. But going back to this trauma, I have my suspicions, but I still don't know what it was. But there was some kind of a trauma in his life, I would say around middle school age and maybe even late elementary. And so he started experimenting with alcohol and drugs, and he became an addict. And he had many years where he was really good and he got his life back in line, but then he needed some surgeries and he was given oxytocin. So it was really like he got hooked, and it was about 6 weeks after he got oxytocin that he died. And it was, not oxytocin, we love Oxycontin. And it was brutal. It was just brutal. He had a son I've never seen a parent love a child the way my brother loved his son. And so that's a gift for us that we get to still see his son who looks so much like him. And yeah, I don't know. Nobody ever asked me to talk about him, so I don't quite know what to say.
Thank you for sharing that part, because it really did touch me in the book. And for me, it really set up the following chapters and gave a beautiful foundation for what you would write about in the further chapters. So in moving on, you talk about releasing grief and romancing plants. I can't say that I've ever heard it put that way before, but I understand. Will you touch on that first?
Sure, the romancing plants part?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was something that the plant showed me. I have this ash tree that I absolutely fell in love with when I was doing my training at the Pam Montgomery's place. And as I was doing this, actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's way ahead. So just the one who gave me the name Romancing the Plants. But my first experience was actually with willow. And this was many years before. Right. And I was in a class, actually with Starhawk, and it was at our local college in the middle of the suburbs. And they had like a little garden outside. And I don't quite know what the exercise was anymore, but I know we were supposed to connect with the plant. And so our eyes were supposed to be closed. So I connected with this beautiful old willow tree there. And all of a sudden, I had an orgasm just standing there, connecting with this tree, surrounded by people, eyes closed, completely closed, like not attempting any of this. And it shocked me. And I was like, what is happening? And now, since then, I've done lots of work. And so now I understand what was happening. What we even call orgasm is simply energy moving through us, drifting through us. So that's what I was feeling. But that was such an unknown experience to me. One of the things that I learned from Pam, that she had a similar experience, that it was like, oh, okay, so I'm not crazy. This is a thing. But again, afterwards, I started working with the plants more and realized it's possible. So from that, I started working with plants as, I'm going to use this term, but as a lover. And I don't mean honestly, I don't go out to have orgasms with plants. It's not something that I need to do, that I want to do, but it's really just recognizing that plants are other beings who I can love and I can experience love with, because I get lots, when I engage with plants, you just get so much unconditional love.
Yes. And you feel it. It's a very physical response.
Right. And so they gave me this practice called romancing the plants. And there's really I say practice, but there's really no practice, because really it's just looking at them as if a lover, touch them as if they're your lover, speak to them as if they're your lover, write them love poems. How do you engage with a plant and feel that energy? And I continue to share it because what I've noticed is, unfortunately, there are so many people that have been so traumatized in their relationships with other humans that they don't feel safe in romantic situations or sometimes even just in the periphery of humans. And so when they're engaging in romancing the plants, it allows them to have that experience of love and safe relating with another being. And so and also in my classes, one of the times that I taught this, everybody was like, I don't know how to romance somebody. Like, I don't know what that means. So it's like, oh, okay. Well, so the plants also help us to learn that, help us to learn how we want to be treated, what makes us feel loved, and how do we show that to another person or another being. And so it has profound healing implications, as well as another way to receive information and guidance from the plant.
Can you share the exercise, romancing your plant ally, you included in the chapter?
Yeah. So what I encourage people to do, like I said, is to write a love poem. So you want to, again, we always start from the heart. So you want to get in with your heart, connect with your plant, and just really write them a love poem, just as if they were somebody you're courting. So that's part of this whole work with plants, is that our society is so used to, like Pam talks about seduction, and I don't even want to say it's seduction.
Yeah.
It's almost like kidnapping. Like, one of the images that's getting is like hitting people over the top of the head. And we're very non-consensual as a society. And even when it comes to selling things, we want to force you to buy this, whether you want it or not. And the plants, that's not how nature works. Everything's based on consent, and it has to be beneficial to all beings involved. And so working with the plants in this way, it's learning how to court, learning how to like really recognize what makes them feel loved, what do they need, as well as like then translating it to another being. So we work with, it's a long way of saying, we write a poem.
Is the poem the Kickstarter for having people then go out with an open heart and find a plant to communicate love to?
So it's more the other way around. It's more like the poem is, well, it's not really the culmination. Generally we have a relationship with the plant before we get to the poem. So that's why I don't start with that exercise, because just like anybody, if we take it back to human relations, we don't know when we go out on a first date with somebody, we're not going to want to we don't know everything that they need or that they want or they love, or we don't want to open up our hearts real far. Not with plants, it's safe. You can open your hearts as far as you want the first time, but there's a getting to know. And so the more we work with plants or any aspect of nature, the more we work with them, the more they reveal themselves. And then the easier it is for us to express our love to them. Yeah.
I liked how you approached the plant. And it was like, when touching it, it's like a soft stroking. What's the word? I'm not expressing this right. Caressing with the palm and then maybe the back of your fingers.
Right.
And I've been doing that for a long time. And now that my granddaughters are getting a little older, even taught one of the girls that's 2 years old how to approach a plant and do the same thing, just to caress with your soft hand and then the back of your hand. So she was doing that with her mother later on.
I love it.
Yeah, they're never too young, right?
No.
So let's revisit the willow tree.
What would you like to know, John?
I think it's probably one of the easiest trees to identify.
Right.
And what's the benefit of the willow tree?
Well, there are lots of gifts. And so this is part of the whole point of this work, is that the more we work with the plant, the more they reveal themselves, and they always reveal what we most need at that time. So again, Willow's the one that introduced me to this concept of romancing plants. I mean, they didn't use the term at the time, but it opened me up to this possibility. And after my brother died, Willow was one of the first plants that really helped me to get out of what I call the abyss of grief. So when he died, I really didn't know if I wanted to stay in this world. I mean, I had 2 kids and I would never have thought of leaving them anytime before nor after. But at that point in time, I was just like, I don't think I can survive this world without him. And so I went into this very deep, dark abyss of grief. And Willow was one of the first plants to show up. And so we had a willow I was living on a farm then. We had a willow that I would go and spend time with every day, and would just weeping willow would wrap their branches around me and just really hold me. And Willow told me just to give over the grief and that willow could take this and hold it and transmute it. And if I ever want it back, I can get it back. But there's more. So it was like grief at that point was too much for me to handle. I couldn't function. I couldn't breathe. And so it just helped to lighten the load a little bit so I could start to function in the world. When we look at the herbal impacts of willow is contains salicylic acid, which is a major pain reducing element. And so it only makes sense that the whole spirit of willow helps to reduce our pain. So when we talk about grief, and grief I would say is probably the biggest component of pain, but anytime that we need some help, willow is able to hold it for us. And I work with willow. I'm not sure if I put this in the book or not. I work with willow in a different way as well. And so I share this because I know you work with shamanism too. And it's that sometimes we want to be invisible in this world. And so when we need that invisibility, willow helps us to know when it's time. Sometimes we just need to do some work and not leave like an energetic trail. Or maybe we want, this isn't when I would work with willow, but I know some people who live in cities and want to communicate with plants and they don't feel safe doing it out there. You can call on willow to surround you and protect you and just let other people pass you by. So that's another great gift from willow.
Yeah. When you're speaking of willow and holding your grief in our grief circles that we teach that we hold, having that witnessing or that container that having other people form for you or having your spiritual ancestors present, it'd be creating a container for your grief. And it allows us to then not hold our grief as trying to speak of it, but it allows others to hold our grief as we speak.
Right.
And witness the grief and the pain that we carry. And it just, the way you were speaking of it, it just sounded like she's forming a container as well as holding you.
Yeah. And so I just want to speak to that a little bit, John, is that so often when we're in that grieving process, because we just lost someone that we love dearly, and that's the form of grief I'm talking about. Like there's this other grief of like the planetary stuff happening, right? There's thoughts or the loss of habitat or whatever, that there's all of that, but particularly losing somebody. Often we want to hold on to our grief because we feel like that's the last thing that we have of them. And so that goes back to earlier when you said about some people don't want to move beyond. They stay in the grief and always want to be the mourning person, whether I was going to say widow, but it could be the mourning parent, whoever. Like that's the definition that we come for ourselves because we don't want to hold it or we don't want to let go. We're afraid if we do, we'll lose any other connection with that person. And it's absolutely not true. And I think the most important thing is when we're ready to process through and let go, what we discover is we have a completely different relationship with that person and we can continue to have relationships with them. But more than anything, we free ourselves to find who we truly are as well. So that's one of the things Willow helps us to do is if we're really wanting to hold on to that pain, Willow invites us to be like, here, you can let it go a little bit. And and there's also, sometimes there's a little bit of shame in that. Like I shouldn't enjoy life. I shouldn't be happy. But that's absolutely not true. Like life is a mixed bag where we can feel all of these emotions at the same time. And most importantly, we are meant to be happy and joyous whenever we can. And that's what our loved ones would want us to be anyways. And if they didn't, then they had serious issues. But if we're mourning them, if we're really grieving them, then I'm guessing they would want us to be happy and healthy individuals.
And that kind of brings us to our next chapter in your book, where you speak of the power of love. And of course, rose is the plant that you choose for embracing grief, the power of love. In this chapter, you define love.
Yeah, you're going to challenge me here because I can never remember the exact words. But it comes from Scott Peck, and it's his definition. And it's that love is the will to, oh gosh, John, you might have to read it for me. But basically what it is that we want, when we're experiencing love for another person, it's that we are wanting them to grow and to be who they can be. And we want the same for ourselves. It's like we're nourishing each other's soul growth.
Close enough. I couldn't find the exact one.
It's okay.
I'll put it in the show notes. But so how does rose work its magic?
So first of all, I said the heart's everything, right? And I work with
Yes.
love, and love is the guiding force for my life. Was before my brother died, but even more so after he died. I just started working even more with love. But what I discovered with some of my clients was that sometimes they had a hard time receiving love. And I don't just mean like in a relationship. I mean, transmitting the energy of love to them to help
Hmm.
heal whatever's going on. They couldn't, it was too much. And we know that not we all, but most of us have some traumas around love or have some beliefs around love or whether we're lovable. And so Rose helps to do the same thing while overriding all of those beliefs. Rose comes in a form that is much easier for our bodies to digest and just opens us up to that possibility. So it really helps our heart. Of course, Rose is notorious for helping heart, being transmitting the energy of the heart. Rose also helps us to soften and the softening is another form of strength, which is counter
Yes.
to what our culture normally considers strength. We normally think of strength as being really rigid and big
And building,
muscles.
yeah.
Like then I had that club, like we're going to club you over the head because I'm so strong. And anybody who has done any work working with compassion or
That
forget
doesn't.
how hard that actually is. It's way harder to be compassionate or engage in forgiveness, remain in your heart than it is to overpower somebody. And so that's where the softness is. And then when it comes to grief, well, I had been working. So I said, Willow helped me come out of the abyss. There were a number of other trees that I was working with at
Hmm.
the time. And I had been working with Rose, but then I was at an herbal conference and it was my first big gathering since my brother had died.
Hmm.
And Robin Rose Bennett was there and I was expressing my grief and she put her arms around me and she said, Rose in all ways, all day. And so that just gave me permission to go even further with Rose. And I did Rose in all ways. I took rose glycerin. I made rose tea. I had rose truffles. I put rose lotion, rose hydrosol, rose flower essence, of course, spending
Hmm.
time with Rose, like all the things. And so Rose just helps us remember that we are loved and we are loved and helps to heal our heart. And in that healing also helps us particularly when it comes to grief, really
Hmm.
helps to find the beauty of that grief and the beauty of the relationships that we are grieving.
Can you take us to your self-love ritual?
Yes, that one I can definitely tell you about. So, so I offer this. This is a thing that came to me from Rose actually after my divorce or when it was when we were in the separation bit.
Mhm.
I really took to heart that if I don't love myself, no one else can love me. And I know there's all kinds of issues around that quote, but I also feel that there's some truth in that and it's not that we can't experience love,
Mhm.
but since we're all connected, we can't fully experience because we're not allowing ourselves to take in the love that's expressed towards us. So I really took it to heart. And in that time, Rose showed me this self-love ritual and I share it as a guide. It's not dogmatic, but what helped me was I got a candle that was rose scented and I will light it. And well, when I create sacred space first, and then I light it and I say some form of a prayer as in lighting it, often to the tune of, I'm lighting this candle in honor of love for myself. And then several things happen. Numerous things can happen. So once the candle's lit, then I can engage in an activity that makes me feel loved. So it could be taking a bath. It could be sitting down and reading a book. It could be
Mhm.
meditating. It could be eating chocolate. It could be, there's unlimited things there. And part of this is also discovering what makes us feel loved. And the other thing that I suggest people do, and I did, is so often our culture teaches us to not love our bodies.
Mhm.
And so we spend time in front of the mirror. And before you get to the mirror, you might want to start with an aspect of your body that you like. So eyes are often a good one, hands, some aspect that you can appreciate at least.
Mhm.
And again, we're engaging in self-love. So we're just bathing this aspect of ourselves in love and remembering all the ways in which they help us and bring such beauty to our life. So it's our eyes. It's like all the different amazing colors we can see and the faces of our children or our grandchildren or our loved ones, or like all that we get to experience with our eyes or with our hands, like all that we get to experience with our hands. And so this is usually a long process of like many times, but we eventually want to broaden that. So like from our hands, maybe up our arms to our elbows, and just really loving them until we can get to the point where we can love our entire bodies, scars, cellulite, all of it. And we see the beauty and we're so grateful because these incredible bodies, despite what our culture wants us to believe, they are the only reason why we get to experience all the beauty in the world. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is only temporary. And no matter what ugliness we think our bodies might emit or like have, it's really nothing. It's really just all perception, and that can all get shifted. And once we can really love our bodies, then we're just free. Like it frees us up from so much stuff. And again, the more we can love ourselves, the more love we can experience and the more love we can share with other beings.
Mm-hmm. We are just about out of time. Can you speak about chapter 13, Living to Die? And you spoke about poison hemlock. What's your thoughts?
So I work with poison hemlock. I'm laughing because this is a highly poisonous plant. And most people are so scared of this plant. And I see so much rhetoric about like, basically, if you see this plant, you got to destroy her. But like how you're going to destroy they don't really tell you. Anyway, for me, poison hemlock came to my life in such a strange way. And now the sanctuary that I live in, there's poison hemlock all over. And poison hemlock reminds me of royalty. So I refer to her as the queen, and really reminds me to like embrace who I am and my gifts. But the real reason why I included poison hemlock in this book is because we have such a fear of death in our culture. And also not just a fear of death, but we look at death as a failure. Like all we're supposed to do is try to be as young and alive as we possibly can. And that's not really the point of life. The point of life is to learn lessons and to heal and to grow as individuals, as souls, as communities. And so poison hemlock helps us to overcome that fear of death and in that process, really embrace life. So I'm going to give my caveat that I gave in the book. So when I talk about poison hemlock sharing this lesson, I am talking about the plant spirit of poison hemlock or the flower essence of poison hemlock, not ingesting poison hemlock in any way because she is deadly. So not recommended to do that.
And in the spirit form.
Right.
Let's talk about that as how somebody may experience hemlock in relationship to dying.
Yeah. So with poison hemlock in the spirit, so when we're talking about plant spirits, when we're communicating with them, that's who we are communicating with. It's a plant spirit. So when we take a tincture, we're ingesting physical aspects of a plant. And that's only one part. And we can, depending on how the tincture is made and depending on our relationship with the plant, we can also engage with the plant spirit at that level, but often that doesn't happen. So when we have this direct communication, this encompasses all of the aspects of the plant. So when we work with the plant spirit of poison hemlock, they just show us that death is merely a transition. There's nothing to be frightened about. Like it's not an ending. And yeah, it's just another opportunity of growing and healing.
Thank you so much for all your wisdom today. And thank you for being here and bringing your energy into this conversation. As we close out today's enlightening conversation with Jen Frey, we've delved into the heart of communicating with plants, uncovering the profound ways this connection can heal and transform our experiences of grief and shame. Jen's journey and wisdom have illuminated the path to a deeper, more soulful relationship with the natural world, reminding us of the healing power right in our backyards. Dive deeper into this conversation by sharing your reflections on today's episode in the comments, or reach out to me directly at john@urbangriefshamans.com. Until next time, may your explorations bring you closer to the harmony and wisdom of nature.